All right, so it looks like we're starting out live here on Tuesday night for our weekly review session, weekly turn-up session.
I can't do this. Not without you, not without your face. I could assassinate the president.
Got to mute that, or that's going to really get old really fast. Okay, so we got one viewer on. Other people are coming on. We got a couple minutes before we're going to get started, but if you have any questions that you'd like to ask, feel free to ask them over in the chat window on the side here, and you can get them answered. And what we're going to try and do is try and go through the major points of period 1, which is really the first quarter of all of AP Euro. So there's a whole lot to cover here. So, you know, I'd rather it be a little bit more question and answer, where you guys have questions about things you don't understand. But I'm going to focus really on big concepts here, about how things relate to one another, and about, you know, sort of the bigger picture of European history, and maybe a little bit less on like long stories, which is what I tend to tell here. So yeah, we'll just wait a couple more minutes, wait for some more people to get on. But if you do have questions, please feel free to start typing them in, and I can start thinking of answers and all of that. You're going to see me jumping back and forth, taking a look at my curriculum guide here, just because I think it's important to understand that when you're getting ready to study for one of these exams, you know, the College Board has really laid out in a pretty straightforward way exactly what's testable and what's not testable, and they've taken a lot of stuff off the table. So, you know, the old read the whole textbook thing is not necessarily true. In fact, it's not true at all. And so I'm going to be very careful to try and really address the things that are in the curriculum outline, and that and that will help you guys kind of understand, well, what it is that you need to know, and what it is that you that you should be looking for. So so yeah, here it is, 8 o'clock. Welcome. My name is Paul Sargent. This week on AP Euro Live, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at period 1, kind of review all of the big ideas, the big concepts here that are pulling it together. And I'm going to try and be a little bit broad here. I'm going to try and pull together big themes and big concepts, so that we can look at trends over time, so that we can look at trends over time, and sort of the big picture of what's going on, to give you a better idea. So that's sort of the idea here. As I just said, I'm going to be referring back to my trusty AP European History curriculum guide here, which is published by the College Board, because in doing the curriculum, they have taken a lot of things which are in a traditional textbook, and they've taken it offline. Like, it's stuff that you don't need to know everything in the textbook anymore. And so I want to focus on being able to tell you, like, hey, there are some things that you just don't need to worry about, or you just don't need to know all that much about. You can use it for background information, and if you know the whole textbook, hey, more power to you. But there's a lot of stuff in there that isn't necessary knowledge and won't be tested in really any direct way. Doesn't mean you can't use it, doesn't mean it's nice to know, and it doesn't mean that if you love history, that you can't enjoy sort of just learning some cool stories. But tonight's a little bit more about big picture kind of things, so keep that in mind. I'll also start off just by sort of giving you a little resource that you might want to look at. You'll see at the bottom of my screen here is the address for my website, and I just want to sort of share my screen before I get on to questions here, and that way you can kind of see. Let's see if we go to desktop here. I'm going to share my screen, and then I'm going to pull up my website, and when I pull up my website, what I want you to see is that if you look under AP European History, not only do I have outlined all of the historical thinking skills that you would need, that you need to know in this course, all of the historical themes are laid out here. The entire concept outline, which really is what I'm working off of, is available here. So that if you're looking for period 1, I mean, you can look at these 5 pages right here and see this is all of the information that's going to be tested. And for each one, if we just choose like Reformation, for example, you'll see, and this is all straight from the College Board. I didn't write this, but there's a narrative about what you're supposed to understand. And then there are different pieces that you're supposed to understand as you go along. Those things that are bulleted like these right here are they're examples. In other words, they're nothing that's going to be directly tested, but there are things which you could use to try and illustrate an idea. So, for example, here, monarchs and princes such as the English rulers Henry VIII and Elizabeth I. Well, they're named here in the thing, so those names are very important. Initiated religious reform from the top down in an effort to exercise greater control over religious life and morality. Examples then of monarchs and princes doing this are the Spanish Inquisition, the Concordat of Bologna, the Book of Common Prayer, and the Peace of Augsburg. And that means that you could use any one of these in order to illustrate that point. But here's something that might be a little bit more helpful for you. Now, my site is arranged chronologically because I'm just finding that's easier to teach. But if you're looking for information on the Renaissance, for example, you can go here where I have links to all of my videos, but I also have for my students and for you guys, a study guide for each one of the chapters. And when you click on the study guide, and these I created from the curriculum outline itself, whoa, that is absolutely not where that should have jumped to. Whoops. Broken link. All right. Way to fail on the first one there. How about we just go to Reformation then? See if we can't make this one work. Okay. So if we go to the Reformation study guide here, there you go. Reformation and religious wars. You'll see these are the terms which are outlined. It's like you have to know them. Here are the additional terms, which are those bulleted things. And then I've created questions which walk you through, do you understand the different parts of the curriculum outline? So those are there for, they're a work in progress. So those are there for lots of different areas of the curriculum. So I just want to show you that. It's all there at my website. So feel free to use them. Feel free to download them. Feel free to study off of them. If you have a test tomorrow, it might be a little bit too much, but as sort of a cumulative thing, it might help you as you go along. So anyway, to get to some of the questions we have from Thomas Stang, you're a Euro student with Miss Fisher in Plano, Texas, I'm assuming that is. What was the relations between the Valois and the nobles during the French Wars of Religion? All right, well, you see, the French Wars of Religion really have to be looked at in the larger concept of, or larger context of the Reformation. And the French Wars of Religion, and all wars of religion in a way, at different degrees, obviously. The French are the most prominent example. But their attempts for the monarchs to try and consolidate control. If you recall, during the Renaissance, these new monarchs try to consolidate control of their countries, and they're really taking power away from the nobility, because that's where the power had been during the Middle Ages. And there's only so much power, and so if power goes towards the monarch, it necessarily goes away from the nobles. And so during the French Wars of Religion, what happened was many nobles adopted Protestant ideals, specifically Calvinism. They're called Huguenots or Huguenots in French or in France, and they try and gain power. Now, there's some argument over as to what degree these monarchs or these nobles are Protestant, and to what degree they're using religion in order to use it as a basis to gain power back from the king. But regardless of what happens, there's a split, because many of these nobles who've taken on the Calvinist religion use that in order to try and or in order to create this conflict with the rising power of the Valois dynasty. And actually, they end up working, because the end of the French Wars of Religion is the victory of Henry of Navarre, who is himself a Calvinist, a Huguenot, and he takes power. Now, he's also a realist, or at the time, what historians refer to as a politique, where he sort of rises above the sort of prevailing ideas of religion, and uses sort of the stability of the state and the interests of the state as his driving principle. And so what he does very famously is he converts to Catholicism when he becomes Henry IV, King of France, saying very famously that Paris is worth a mass. Now, whether you want to argue that Henry of Navarre or Henry IV never really truly converted, or whether you want to argue that he did convert, and that was the price that he paid to get his Bourbon dynasty started in France, well, that's a different issue. But it is a very large part of the end of the Valois dynasty, which is really what's going on. We got some Herm Panthers. I don't know what Herm is, but I guess you guys have yourselves a test coming up. And some test advice here, as you're going through. I don't know what kind of tests are being given at this point. I personally gradually work my students through the different parts of the exam. So right now, we're very much trying to nail down the multiple choice type of questions, and we're very much trying to nail down the short answer type of questions. We're starting to move into the long essay questions and the DBQs, but we're sort of at the beginning of that. So please add questions to help me along here. But when you're looking at the multiple choice questions, you're going to end up getting a prompt or some sort of a stimulus, like a passage or something like that, that has to do with a particular period of time. And you have to be able to not only read it, interpret it, understand it, but also then apply it to different things. My advice as you attack this is, first of all, be confident in your own abilities. These tests, as they're written now, have more ability to make you doubt yourself than I've ever seen, because there are terms like most likely to, and which one of these is least likely to, and which one of these is most similar to, and and so my question is, when you're looking at this, don't read the stimulus first. Read the questions first, because typically questions will start from a very sort of basic level, and then they'll sort of globalize as you go out. Now, it may be that the first question may be very stimulus based, but at least by looking at the question, you'll know what to look for in the stimulus. The second question may be stimulus based, but maybe bring in a little bit extra knowledge. And then as you move away from, as you move into questions like 3 or maybe even 4 on a particular stimulus, they may get away from the stimulus altogether, and they may say, okay, so the ideas that are put forth here would influence which of the following thinkers, and then they'll list some people who are later on in time. That's just an example of something that you might see. And so read the questions, understand what they're asking you to find in the stimulus, and then read the stimulus to find that stuff. You can waste a lot of time if you're trying to figure out everything you can about the stimulus before even knowing what it is that you're supposed to be knowing. You know what I'm saying? So let's see, Thomas, are stimulus questions based on just the passages, or should we really just ignore the passages? It really, like I said, it really just depends, you know. Some will be based on them, some will not. I have seen sets of questions where if you knew what you were talking about, you could honestly just skip the passage and answer the 4 questions. And I've seen ones where at least 3 of the 4 questions, you really need to read the stimulus in order to understand what they're talking about. But again, better to read the question first and know what you're looking for than just to read it, because you know you're going to go back and read the stimulus again after you read the question. So why waste the time reading the stimulus first? Emma is from Stillwell, Kansas. Hi there, Emma. Can you explain what mercantilism and its effects were? Okay, so mercantilism is really the idea of sort of a state-driven trade economy. The idea is that the state is going to benefit from trade, and so the state needs to drive all trade policy. Colonies come into this, and this really sort of arises along with colonialism, because colonies are a way to increase trade. Because you don't have to trade with other maybe hostile forces, you can trade with your own people in a kind of way. And so in a mercantilist system, with colonies, what happens is the colonies provide the raw materials, they're sent back to the mother country does something with them and makes them all nice, sends them back to the colonies buy more expensive things. The classic example I use is wood, right? So you chop down trees in the New World, you ship them back to the mother country. The mother country has artisans who make furniture out of them. You ship that furniture back to your markets in the New World because you got people there who want furniture. They're going to pay a lot more for furniture than the mother country paid for wood. Therefore, more money is going to come in. Also, if you're able to mine gold, silver, if you're able to trade in spices, anything like that, that's going to help. And it's trade war. So you try and sort of knock other countries out of the trade thing. And that's really what mercantilism is it's a state-driven trade policy that's built to try and increase the amount of wealth being measured in like gold and silver that's owned by the state. And it's really going to be the driving force of trade until the rise of capitalism comes along with the ideals of Adam Smith in 1776. You could probably argue that one, but we'll just go with that for now. So yeah, people are agreeing. Read the question first. Let's see. If the question is about what Kurt Fritz, if the question is about what Luther thinks is the true authority, you don't need the. I'm sorry, it's been a long day. You don't need to read a passage about him hating on peasants. Yeah, absolutely. And Kurt, you got this right. There are certain things that you just kind of need to associate with one, like Martin Luther. You know that his things are the priesthood of all believers and the authority of the Bible, faith as being the sole source of salvation. And if you're reading about John Calvin, then it's all about predestination. If you see a question that has to do with Ferdinand and Isabella, well, it's going to be about their consolidation of power as new monarchs. So you can kind of game the system a little bit about that. Would you discuss the Dutch revolt, Spain versus the Netherlands? Okay, a real good question about the Dutch revolt. Really, the Dutch revolt is another example of this question of what is a driving principle. Is the driving principle religion, or is the driving principle politics? And in this situation, you have Dutch Protestants who revolt against their sort of Spanish Habsburg king. Let's just say that, king. Why not? They revolt against it. They use religion as the sort of driving force behind their revolution, and it's good. It's a good thing to rally behind, but there's also a force for independence here, and so as you have this, you have Spanish you have the Spanish trying to sort of put this down, along with putting down lots of other things and using lots of Spanish silver that's coming from the New World through this mercantilist idea. See, all these things are tied together. They're using all of this to try and stop the revolt in the Netherlands, and they're ultimately unsuccessful. So that the Netherlands gain their independence, create their own republic, and enter their own golden age. And really, you know, they do pretty well for a while as that happens. So it's another good example of you know, the question of what motivates people to do things. Is it religion during this period? Is it politics? Is it economics? Is it, you know, are there all these things? And you know what? We could sit here and we could argue this forever. Historians argue this stuff forever, and you can bring up evidence on every single side. The problem with evidence, though, is that people are going to write for audiences. And so, you know, as you're looking at these documents, as you're looking at these stimuli on test, understand that documents are not written just because, you know, someone's bored at night. They're written for an audience. And so if the audience is the future, or if the audience is to justify what you're doing, or if the audience is something, you know, you're going to use the best argument that you have at your disposal. And oftentimes religion is a far more convincing argument and a far better, I guess, moral argument than politics, although the two can get mixed up together, like the beginning of the 30 Years' War gets a little bit mixed up between, is this a Calvinist versus Catholic thing, or is this a Bohemian versus, you know, Holy Roman Empire thing? First question on Kurt, Mr. Fritz, however you'd like me to say, is on mercantilism. So good. Yeah, you guys have a little basic there. Let's see. Can you talk about the difference between the three social contracts during the period of the Enlightenment? So the Enlightenment actually gets outside of period one. So I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on it, because you guys, if you're pushing ahead in the Enlightenment, like, you're well ahead of, well, at least my classes. I don't know. But I will address two that will come up. And those are actually sort of proto-Enlightenment, pre-Enlightenment, whatever. And those are the ideas of Hobbes and Locke, okay? Thomas Hobbes and John Locke write during the English Civil War. Thomas Hobbes writes during the period of sort of the English Civil War itself. And John Locke writes later during the period of the Glorious Revolution. They write about this idea of sort of a social contract. They write about the idea of a state of nature. And Thomas Hobbes' idea of a state of nature is that it's this nasty, brutish, and short place where life is kind of horrible and insecure. Everybody's like running for their lives. The strong survive and all of that. And so they come together and they basically say, like, we really need security. And in order to get security, they agree to give power over to an individual. And that individual will provide them protection and security, but they have to lose some of their freedoms. They can't just run around and live as free people, because obviously, you know, they can't do anything they want if they're going to have security. You can't just attack somebody because there's no security there. And so his idea then is the outcome of this is that people have given over their power. They need to understand that they can't do anything about it, and that the monarch should have total control, because that was the way it was. John Locke says that, well, you know, that's not exactly how it happened. Security was important. The need to protect property was important, but people came together and they created a social contract. And in the social contract, the idea was that the government was formed along with the consent of the governed, and that people formed government in order to create security, but they also, like, the government had a responsibility to the people, which didn't exist in Hobbes's idea. And if the government didn't protect the rights, the natural rights of those people, which John Locke said were life, liberty, and property, life, liberty, and property, important, then the people had the right to find another government which would protect their rights to life, liberty, and property. And that's taken up by Thomas Jefferson, thrown in the Declaration of Independence, changed a little bit with the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness thing. But yeah, that's sort of the basic thing. That will come up in period one. I don't want to get into Rousseau and all of that, because that's period two, and I want to kind of limit our scope here. So thank you for that question. My name is Kate. I'm from Yardley, Pennsylvania. Hey, I'm from Pennsylvania too. That's great. Sitting here in Hershey, Pennsylvania. But I'll be honest with you. I didn't grow up in Pennsylvania, so I don't know where Yardley is. But would the trade wars that resulted from mercantilism be counted as a causation for the Navigation Act that English enacted to hurt the Dutch? Yes, absolutely. Navigation Act is a great example of, even though you don't need to know anything about the Navigation Acts. If you're bringing this in from like U.S. history, fantastic, but you don't need to know the Navigation Acts. But mercantilist policy kind of set it up so that trade couldn't happen directly with English colonies and the Dutch, or English colonies and anyone else for that example, for that matter. They had to happen with English colonies and England. And what this ended up being, Navigation Acts were unenforced for a long time, but it ended up being a situation where colonists could buy things from other countries, then had to take them to England to one of their ports. Then they had to pay taxes on it there, and then they could ship it to the colonies, which was just a horrible situation that nobody liked, and it really was big, big pain. So you had lots of people who were smugglers, and the most famous smuggler, who we don't really think of as a smuggler anymore, but the most notorious, I guess, smuggler in all of the colonies was John Hancock, who was running rum illegally, although it wasn't being enforced too much until they did enforce it. And he really got upset and said, maybe we need to do something about this. But he was running rum illegally from the Caribbean up to Boston and making quite a bit of money about that. So let's see. Thomas Dang, was Louis XIV really the only true absolute monarch in the period any in Eastern Europe? Okay, so really, with absolute monarchs, you can almost create kind of a checklist of things that an absolute monarch could do. No, he's not the only absolute monarch. There are absolute monarchs in Eastern Europe. I'm going to drink my very ugly green juice, but this is naked juice. This stuff is really good, and it's really good for you too. But hopefully it doesn't leave any blue, any green like residue. Anyway, he was not the only true absolute monarch. He was the best absolute monarch. He was the most successful absolute monarch. And he really did. Like, he was the poster child. He was the model. He was the prototype. He was like, he had it all nailed down. He was the one who was most able to consolidate power completely inside of the king, to completely take away power from the nobility, to completely put them at his every beck and call, and turn his country, France, into the most powerful country in Europe. Were there Eastern European absolute monarchs? Yes, absolutely. You have the rise of the Prussian Hohenzollerns after, who really, I mean, Prussia really rises after the end of the 30 Years' War. They're able to do a fairly good job of creating absolute monarchies. However, the advantage that Louis has is the advantage of a large group of artisans, a lot of businessmen who have a lot of money. And so he's able to bypass the nobles because he doesn't need money from the nobles. He needs money from these artisans and these bankers and all of this stuff. And so what he does is basically he hires people to go out and collect taxes. He takes away all the power of the nobility, and he forces them to come and live at Versailles. And if you don't live at Versailles, you're not in on what's going on at court. So you're kind of out of the nobility kind of thing, and you're not going to get favors from the king, and you're not going to do any of that. Plus, if you can live at Versailles and have a nice catered lifestyle, which is, full of parties and dances and, every distraction you could possibly think of, I mean, why wouldn't you do it? It just seems like a great situation. The Hohenzollerns are unable to do it, largely because they don't have a huge middle class. And so they're able to sort of get the nobility to sort of listen to them and do their will, the nobility there being called the Junkers, or you're going to read it as the Junkers the first time you see it. But he's able to do that basically by bribing them and giving them high positions in the military and different things like that. But you also have Peter the Great in Russia, again, very little middle class. He's able to pull in the nobles because he institutes serfdom and says, all right, so all the people living on your land are yours. You can do whatever you want to with them, pretty much. But you have to, in exchange for that, you have to do what I tell you to do. So it's a less perfect form of absolutism, because he still is reliant on the nobles for their money and for their service and for all of that. So it's a lesser extent in Eastern Europe, and it's largely because of the lack of this merchant class that is so prevalent in places like Spain, although they don't do a great absolute monarch thing, so let's just throw them out. France, England, although they don't do a great absolute. Let's just say France. How about that? Just go France. So let's see. Joey Sierra, would you be able to go over the reemergence of serfdom in Eastern Europe and why the common man did not benefit from kings and vassals conflicts? I think I just did that. It's because there's no middle class. They go from being sort of this, I guess in Western European terms, backwards kind of society. Peter the Great turns around and says, hey, if we want to be competitive at all, if we don't want to really get invaded and taken over, then we need to adopt a lot of the things that they're doing in Western Europe. So he tries to westernize the country, but he doesn't have that economic power base that the Western European countries have. So that's why he has to sacrifice the peasants into serfdom in order to sort of co-opt the nobles. Co-opt the nobles and get them on his side. Whether Louis was truly absolutist or not, I mean, of all of them, he's the closest they come. Absolutism would be, excuse me, a true absolutist would be someone who completely rules by divine right. He has complete control over the people. He has complete control over the country. He's really as close as they come. Yeah, things kind of fall apart near the end of his reign. He fights a series of wars which are unsuccessful. The most successful thing about them is they succeed in uniting a lot of Europe against him. But in terms of, sort of living a life, and if you're looking for an example of absolutism, like, he's the best example that existed. I don't know that you could come up with a better example of this. Sarah Trumbull, you're really helpful. Thank you. Can you help me explain the political and social but not religious consequences of the Protestant Revolution? Okay, well, there's a ton of those. I don't know if I can do this completely off my head. I'm certainly going to miss some, but let me just give you a couple of examples. Political consequences have to do with the rise of sovereignty in some areas. The rise of the Netherlands as the Dutch Republic is an example of this. You can have the end of the English Civil War as sort of an extension of the Protestant Revolution and the emergence of this constitutional monarchy. You can talk about the sort of the Council of Trent and the Catholic Church's reassertion of its correct beliefs as being an outpouring of the Protestant Revolution. But politically, I think it's a division of Europe. I mean, Europe itself had been united at least by one thing for, well, at least 1,000 years, and that was Catholicism. And after the Protestant Revolution, like, that just wasn't true anymore. They were politically going to divide, and after the 30 Years' War, which is sort of the point where most historians say, like, we see this change from religious wars to dynastic wars, the concerns become less about religion and more about politics and maintaining power. And if you have to use religion in order to do that, well, then great. But you know, it's not necessarily all religious anymore. Social consequences of the Protestant Revolution. One of the most talked about is the loss of status for women. Throughout Europe, under Catholicism, one thing that women could always fall back on is going into gosh, you ever just have that moment where the word you're looking for just doesn't come to you? They could become nuns, so they could have an independent lifestyle within the church. But as the Catholic Church disappears, those opportunities for women disappear with them in the areas that go Protestant, because Protestant religions don't have places for that. Another social consequence would be the witchcraft phase, witchcraft craze, because it is very much in Protestant countries where they're looking for these people who are outside, they're practicing different beliefs. And in the wake of all of this turmoil, like, there are a lot of people who are falsely accused of being witches, and there are really some nasty things done to them. There's a very commonly used witchcraft DBQ that I love using with my students because it's just shocking at some of the stuff that's going on with these people. So those are some of the things. I mean, this is something that we could write an entire book on. And you could argue that the consequences of the Protestant Revolution or Reformation are even felt today, in that, you know, you have countries which are largely Protestant, and you have and maybe up until, well, probably today, but I'm just going to throw a relatively recent example. In the United States, the election of John F. Kennedy was a controversy because he was a Catholic, and there were questions brought up during the campaign, valid or not, that of where his true loyalty lay. Like, if you're a Catholic, is your loyalty really to the United States? Is your loyalty to the Pope? And if the Pope in Rome says that something that you're about to do as the president of the United States will send you to hell, then what are you going to choose? Are you going to choose your country or your soul? So, you know, you can make a lot of arguments about that. So Lauren is also from Stillwell, Kansas. Right on. Can you give a quick summary of the 30 Years' War and how it affected Europe socially, politically, and religiously? Boy, you guys just love throwing these really tough ones at me. Okay. Well, let's see. First of all, the summary of the 30 Years' War, you don't really need to know a lot about it. Now, this is where I'm gonna say, for a lot of these questions, you can certainly look at the other videos that are on my YouTube channel. If you know, you guys are on it right now, all you got to do is click subscribe. But I have a whole bunch of videos that I've created which will go through a lot of these topics and explain them in further detail, and probably better than I'm explaining them now, because, you know, it's not just me sort of talking off the cuff. But in terms of this 30 Years' War, really, you don't need to know anything about the actual war itself. Its cause, it starts off as a religious conflict. It ends up as a dynastic conflict. And what I mean by that is that it starts off with Protestants versus Catholics, and they're fighting to try and push for Calvinism to be sort of a recognized and practicable religion within the Holy Roman Empire. Lots of other countries get involved. Lots of other countries start hopping in on the sides of Protestants and all of this. And in the end, what you have in the final phase of the war, you have a Catholic French country, which is being pretty much run by a cardinal of the Roman Catholic Church, Cardinal Richelieu, who makes the decision to back and help Protestant forces against a Catholic Habsburg Holy Roman Empire, because it's better for the interests of France to have a weaker Habsburg, if that makes sense. So the 30 Years' War really affects Europe politically. I'll start there because it creates this shift from religion as the basis of warfare to like dynastic concerns of countries and concerns of the country's rulers as the concern. Maintaining power really is the concern of warfare after this point for a long time, and balancing power so that no country can get too large. Socially, it affects Europe because it absolutely devastates the German states. They're not German, but for its sake, let's just call them German. But it devastates the German states. It changes. It absolutely just tears apart an entire nation. It involves everybody, and people are involved in ways that they never imagined it would be. So there are social ramifications because of sort of the lack of food and the lack of labor force and things like that. And then religiously, it's important because in the end, in the Peace of Westphalia, what they do is they expand on the earlier Peace of Augsburg, which is almost 100 years old at this point. And they say that German princes, like they get rid of the Holy Roman Empire pretty much, they break it all up. Princes now are completely sovereign. They can determine their own religion within their princedom, which is nothing new. They were allowed to do that under the Peace of Augsburg. But under Augsburg, they really had two choices: Catholicism or Lutheranism. And now under the Peace of Westphalia, they were added in. excuse me. They added in the option for Calvinism as that. So that's pretty much what I think are the important things. Okay, so let's see. Gemma here, would you go over Elizabeth I of England ruled as a or as not a politique? Okay, so she was totally a politique, and the reason is because there was a real division in England over, well, the church. So we're back in this time of religious division. And Henry VIII, as you probably know, created the Anglican Church. Really, the only change that he made from the old Catholic Church was that he was the head of the church, not the Pope. Everything else remained the same. All the ceremonies were the same. Everything was the same, right? When he died, his son Edward comes to the throne. Edward is very much more of a Protestant, but not like an Anglican Protestant. He's more of a Calvinist Protestant. He wants to get rid of a lot of the things a lot of the showiness of Catholicism, a lot of the ceremony, he wants to get rid of saints and those sorts of things. And so he starts moving the church towards a very Calvinist, very sort of people-oriented, non-hierarchical kind of church. He dies fairly quickly. His half-sister Mary comes to the throne. She's very Catholic and very angry about what happened to her mother, Catherine of Aragon. So she tries to swing the church absolutely the other way and go back to Catholicism. She persecutes Protestants. Whether it's fair or not, she's given the name Bloody Mary. And, well, she dies too. So here's Elizabeth. And Elizabeth realizes, and this is why she's often like shown as a politique, she realizes that this is a real problem. You have a rising, you have a number of Catholics who are in England. You have a number of Calvinists who are calling themselves Puritans in England. And you have a number of Anglicans who are in England who want kind of like the old Henry VIII kind of church. And so what she's able to do is she's able to create sort of a compromised church that works for everybody and allows everybody to kind of worship their own way. And that, because it's in the interest of the nation, even though it flies in the face of sort of general, at the time, ideas that a country which is not unified religiously can't be unified politically. she flies in the face of that and says, we'll let people worship as they wish and but they're going to be sort of loyal to England as that. So that's sort of where she's identified as a politique here. Let's see. I'm starting to fall behind here. Thomas Dang. So after Louis XIV's war for the Spanish succession, the Bourbons ruled both France and Spain. Yes, they did, Ruth. They did rule both France and Spain. However, the only concession that was in the treaty was that they would not be able to consolidate those two holdings together. So it was kind of a win and kind of a loss, but it was the very last one of Louis XIV's war. Relationship between the Spanish Habsburgs, Austrian Habsburgs, and the Holy Roman Empire. Okay, so really you have two sides of the same family here. Hold on one second. Hey there, what's up?
Hi, Daddy.
Hi. My
Hi.
daughter just came in. Do you want to come in and say hi?
Sure.
Real quickly. Molly.
My name's Molly. Where do I look?
Right there.
Okay. It's
Yeah.
usually on the side from my fire.
Yeah.
Mm,
Is everything
that's
okay?
Mommy.
Oh, okay. Hold on one second. I'm going to put you guys on hold, and I'll be right back. Okay. So please bear with me. All right. Sorry about that. So anyway, a little guest appearance there. She's my little sweetie. Spanish Habsburgs, Austrian Habsburgs, and the Holy Roman Empire. Okay, so the Holy Roman Empire is sort of this large nebulous kind of thing, and is ruled by the Austrian Habsburgs. The Spanish Habsburgs are kind of a separate wing of the family, and really what happens is under Charles V, he becomes the ruler of both the Spanish holdings and the Austrian holdings, or the Holy Roman Empire holdings, and realizes that it's just far too much for one person to handle. And so when he abdicates the throne, when he steps down, he splits it between the two. Now the two are going to on and off work together. There's going to be a lot of intermarriage between the two, which causes some very odd physical traits, most notably. And I'm telling you, if you see a picture with a person that's got this severe like underbite, like the chin kind of goes out way too far, it's probably a Habsburg, because that's what happens, is that they just start to gain these traits, and the traits get worse and worse. I mean, you go to Vienna, you see statues of these people, and it's, you almost wish that someone had like said, hey, we're just going to kind of fix this up on the statue. But no, they're pretty true to life on those statues. So anyway, so they work on and off together. There's always this fear that they're going to join together into this vast conspiracy. It's mostly a fear of France for a long time, but it never really turns into anything that's major. The only time they're really united is, as I said, under Charles V. And Spain is going to kind of drop off the map after the age of absolutism, when the Philips kind of just are unable to do anything except bankrupt the state. Daniela, you have Mr. Wenninger for a Piero right across the road. I love it. Someone local. All right, Daniela. Hey, cool. Were Protestants and Lutherans the same thing under the same name? Okay, so Protestants is like a big, large term, and Lutherans is a very specific term. I guess originally you would say yes, because the Lutherans were the first, and then therefore they were the only Protestants early on. But as other Protestant groups started popping up, then there were other Protestants. So I guess the safe way to put that, and in a very simple way, all Lutherans are and were Protestant, but not all Protestants are and were Lutheran. Does that make sense? So hopefully that kind of gets that. Yeah. Oh, sorry, Mr. Fritz already got that one. Yeah, Protestants are generally any Christians. I just lost your thing. Wait. Generally any Christians that aren't Catholic, with the exception of Eastern Orthodox. And yeah, Kurt Fritz put it out perfectly. I mean, we also tend to leave Eastern Orthodox out of it. We kind of tend to talk about Protestants and Catholics and like that's it. And then every now and then we throw Russia in there and we go, oh yeah, there's this other church called the Eastern Orthodox, which had broken up a long time ago. But yeah, they're just in Russia, so we'll just move on. And that's really the only time it comes up. But yeah, generally speaking, you're going to have Catholics, Eastern Orthodox, and then Protestants. And then Protestants, you got like basically any other Christian religion that you can come up with would classify as Protestant. I'm just going to go with that just to make things easy. How about that? Let's see. So Sarah Tremble, let's see. Any tips on how to remember all the differences of Luther and Zwingli and Calvin and all of that? Really, the easiest thing to do is just to make yourself a little sort of cheat sheet chart. And I think we've already got people answering other people's questions. Zwingli, yeah, his big thing. Although I'll tell you what, Zwingli is not part of what you need to know. You do not need to know who Zwingli is. But yes, he goes out, he creates a small religion in Switzerland, and his basic disagreement with Luther is that communion is like a symbolic remembrance of the Last Supper, whereas Luther believed in sort of what's called transubstantiation, which is that there actually is during communion the wine and the bread actually become the blood and body of Christ, and so therefore it's sort of a real and somewhat mystical and magical ceremony. And Calvin will continue Zwingli's idea and say, no, this is just symbolic. This is something we do to remember. And that's all it is. So we've got some synthesis there. Thomas saying about communion, Lord's Supper, the Eucharist. So Luther believed it was only spiritual, and Zwingli denied it completely. Luther believed the body and blood of Christ was literal, which is exactly what the Catholic Church remembered or believed. Now he said it was spiritual, symbolic. Okay, what was the main cause of the price revolution? Okay, Emma, that's all right. I'm letting you guys answer each other's questions in the chat if you can, because I can only take on so much, and the brain only functions so quickly. The main cause of the price revolution: an influx of Spanish silver. Absolutely, that's what it is. They hit so. I mean, think of all the Spanish holdings in the New World. They own basically the Americas. I mean, take out the coast of Brazil, and they own North and South America. That's it. Anything that's there, it's theirs. Now, they don't obviously settle it all, conquer it all, or even find it all, but they do technically own it all. And so as they do this, they go out looking for gold. Well, they don't find a lot of gold in the New World, but what they do find is they find a ton of silver, especially around Mexico City. And they start mining it, sending it all back. And this is mercantilism, right? You mine the raw materials, you send them back to the mother country. And that Spanish silver is used to fight the wars of religion, fight against the efforts of Protestants to take over Spain, but also, to try and stop the Netherlands from becoming Protestant and independent, to try and fund the Spanish Armada to attack England, to try and fund Spanish efforts. I mean, it's just all used for war. And war has a way of sucking away finances. So what do? You just bring in more silver. But as more and more silver ends up in the economy, it becomes worth less, right? That's just That's simple supply and demand. If there's a larger supply, then it becomes worth less. And so as the value of silver goes down, then the cost of things goes up. But for the normal people, for your everyday peasant or whatever, they have a hard time being able to afford things because they can't. Like their wages, how they're being paid, is not keeping up with the prices that are going up as a result of all this Spanish silver. So, so that's the biggest cause of the price revolution that are out there. Let's see, surplus of gold and silver. My gosh, you guys are answering all of this. And yes, Lauren Williams, nicely put. You basically got that. Although keep in mind, it's less about gold and it's more about silver as it goes along here. You guys are way ahead of me here. Let's see. Sorry for the change in topics, but could you elaborate on the French-Spanish War that the Treaty of the Pyrenees ended? So that's going to be the war. I think you're talking about the War of Spanish Succession there. And again, you don't need to know about these wars. Like literally, you need to know nothing about any of the wars. The biggest thing that you need to know, and again, I'm just going to start because I don't want to spend too much time on stuff that you're not going to need here. Yeah, here we go. So the only thing you need to know about these wars is this right here. It says Louis XIV's nearly continuous wars, pursuing both dynastic and state interests. Okay, so trying to help out his family and help out France, provoked a coalition of European powers opposing him. That's all you need to know. You don't need to know anything else about it. So don't be sure. I showed you at the beginning, and if you weren't here at the beginning, go to my website and look. You'll find the concept outline. Look at it and see. I mean, there's a limited amount of things that you need to know, and so you don't need to spend time on things that aren't on there, unless your teachers are testing things that aren't on there. But when it comes to the AP exam, and I try to do this in my class, I try and stick to the things that the College Board has said are the things which are important. Sorry guys, it's been a long day, teaching, coaching, all of that. Let's see, Keelan, what is the best way to divide and remember the parts of the 30 Years' War and the most important parts? Again, you don't need to know the 30 Years' War. You don't need to know the parts of the 30 Years' War. The only thing you need to know about the 30 Years' War are its effects of the 30 Years' War. And that is sort of the rise of Prussia, the rise of Austria. You have the division of the Holy Roman Empire. You have the change from religious wars to dynastic wars, and really, you don't need to worry about the war itself. And I have a video on the Peace of Westphalia, which I think sums it up pretty well as to exactly what it is that you need to know. But when you come to the 4 phases and all of that, don't even worry about it. It won't be on the exam. Spielvogel said, Zwingli believed that scriptural words, this is my body, this is my blood, should be taken symbolically, and refused to accept Luther's insistence on the real presence. Yeah, right. That's exactly what I was talking about. Like, it's a symbolic. And I think in the modern day, at least Protestants, they look at this as a symbolic thing. People who go to church and they take communion, they're not believing that this is actually the blood of Christ, which has, sort of transformed itself into this wine for this purpose, but that this is something that we do to remember, and this is a symbolic gesture, much like shooting off fireworks on the 4th of July, I guess. It isn't really an explosion of independence. I don't know, I'm really stretching this one, but you get the idea. It's a symbolic act right here. And we've got a community of learners here. You're right. You're right. Luther didn't believe it was literal, though, just thought that Jesus was there in a way that he was in everything else, like people and air. Agreed. Well, Luther, See, Luther's kind of a tricky guy. He writes a ton of stuff. And it is like an evolving Luther as you look along. So to look at one thing and say this is Luther is a really tough thing, because Luther evolves from a priest who is, well, a person first. Yes, priests are people, but you know, a lay person, how about that, who really is concerned solely with salvation. Like he's really, really, really afraid that he's not going to make it into heaven, and he really, really, really wants to make it into heaven. And he evolves over a long period of time into a religious revolutionary. And when he does this, like he does disagree with the church on a lot of things, but he was a priest of the Catholic Church. I mean, you know, and there's some things that he holds on to, and it's the things that he thinks are backed up by Scripture. And he does believe that communion is a mystical, magical time when the body and the blood of Christ actually do enter into the wine and the bread of communion. And so therefore it isn't symbolic, it's actually a communion with God. And so, yeah, so that's sort of the difference there. So I'm hopefully kind of helping you guys up. How do you write an LEQ? Mabel, that is a long, difficult question. I do have a video on my attempt or my explanation of how to write an LEQ. Sorry, almost went back to FRQs there. LEQs, I would literally say the best formula for an LEQ is this. You look at the question and you sort of jot down things that you think you can answer, the stuff you know. Jot them all down and then say, okay, what sort of sense does this make? And then how can I answer the question based on that? In the first paragraph, you contextualize, you put in the larger context here. And this is sort of like, the analogy I always use is the opening credits of a Star Wars movie. You know, you're not just going to jump right into Star Wars and have, you know, and have this scene where Darth Vader is walking onto the ship and captures Leia. No, because that wouldn't be, you know, people would be sitting there saying, what's going on? I don't understand, you know, and lots of movies do this. You have this context. And so they say, hey, this is going on. Here's the situation. This is galaxy far, far away, you know, a long, long time ago. And that way you're in the mood and you go like, okay, I kind of understand the backstory a little bit. Now let's jump into it. And so you want to do that in your opening paragraph. Then you want to end with a good thesis. And that thesis statement is going to say, like, here's how I'm responding to the prompt. And you can go with the formulaic thesis, which says, like, here's how I'm going to respond, and I'm going to use these 3 types of evidence to respond to it. Or you can go with a much more generalized thing and say, this is how it happened, and you know, and then you go on, you explain it. Then you generally have some sort of a 5. I mean, the 5-paragraph essay is like the classic, you know, you just write it and it's once you get to know it, it's easy, but not every prompt gives itself to a 5-paragraph essay. So you organize the information that you have, you write it into evidence that would support the thesis that you have. Then you write a concluding paragraph that says, okay, so because of all this evidence, I was right when I said this. You kind of restate your thesis again. I like this not only because it's part of like the formulaic 5-paragraph essay, but also because you can get the thesis point in the opening paragraph or in the conclusion. And so you might as well write it twice if you have time. And then that's when you then synthesize and you kind of like shoot it out and you're like, okay, so this is like this other period of time, or this is like this same thing which is going on in a different part of the world at the same time, and sort of globalize your ideas there as you go along. So that's the basis for that. But I would say for more detail, look at my video on the LEQ, and if you want even more detail than mine, Tom Ritchie, my good friend, has a number of videos on the LEQ, so you can go through and you can watch those. I highly recommend his stuff as well. It's great. Time management is just when you're writing LEQs, when you're writing any of this stuff, it's all about just pacing yourself. You know, write it well, but and explain yourself, but write quickly. One thing though that I emphasize with my students is that it's important that the readers can read your handwriting. Like, don't push yourself so fast that your writing becomes illegible, because you won't get anything out of it. You'd rather have a little bit less and be able for them to read it than to push the envelope, just like, you know, do sort of word vomit onto the page and have them not understand what any of it means. So, you know, pick out 2 or 3 pieces of evidence per paragraph, and then discuss them a little bit. And that's really the best thing. And then the other thing for time management is the conclusion is not like mandatory. None of it's mandatory, but the conclusion is like, if you're running out of time, don't write a conclusion, just leave it out there, because the one thing you might, well, the point you will lose if you follow the format that I like is you'll lose the synthesis point. But if, let's face it, if you do well on the exam or do well on the essay and you hit everything else, you've got 6 out of the 7 points. And like, you know, that's good. That's good. Let's see, out of all of the artists, which ones are going to be emphasized? All right, Keelan, again, look at the curriculum outline, the artists that are laid out, and this is really gonna kind of surprise you as you go through. I'm trying to get to the point where they're talking about art here, but in period 1, it's I believe, yeah, it's all in learning objective 1.1. Here's who they mention will be on the exam, or could be on the exam. Let's make that clear. Yeah, that would be no one. They don't mention a single artist. Now, in the examples, the things that you can use, that's where they list artists specifically. Michelangelo, Donatello, Raphael, Palladio, Alberti, Brunelleschi. Those are sort of your Renaissance artists and architects. Also Renaissance, going into the Northern Renaissance and even into Baroque, with this sort of idea of naturalism. Raphael again, Da Vinci, Jan van Eyck, Peter Bruegel the Elder, and Rembrandt are given as examples you can use. And then for the Mannerist and Baroque artists, they give you the examples of El Greco, Gentileschi, Bernini, and Rubens. My advice is from those 3 lists right there, and again, you can go to my website, you can look at the curriculum outline, and you can see these examples. From those examples, know one really well. So, you know, watch my video on Michelangelo, understand Michelangelo really well, and you don't have to worry about the rest of them, because Michelangelo will be your example of Renaissance works based on classical styles with perspective and all of that. Let's say Jan van Eyck. That's the one that I did a video on. And then you understand him as naturalism. When you look at Mannerist and Baroque artists, well, they both kind of do the same thing. They do it in different ways. But hey, why not? Let's just even stretch the envelope here. Know one of each, okay? So your Mannerist artist, El Greco. Your Baroque artist, Peter Paul Rubens. Boom. 4 artists. You've got the whole thing covered. So that's kind of how I would approach doing that. But specific emphasis, they really won't be. They might show you a piece of art and ask you what movement it looks like, or what movement it came from. They're not going to be really, really difficult on this one. And you know, at this point, after 1 period, I mean, really, we've covered Renaissance, we've covered Northern Renaissance, We've covered Baroque and Mannerist, and that's basically it. So there's not a lot you can throw around there. But by the time the AP exam comes around, they'll put, you know, a sculpture or a painting up there, and they'll ask you which art movement does this most likely represent. Well, first of all, you're going to have a date on the painting. And I can almost guarantee that. So that'll help you a whole lot if you know kind of what period these things are in. But then they'll throw in something like maybe it's a Renaissance painting, and maybe it's not. You know, maybe it's by Raphael, which is not the one that you got to know. You got to know Michelangelo, but here's a Raphael painting, right? But you look at it and you go, okay, all right, I see some things here, okay. And then you look at your choices. Well, they've got Renaissance. And then they have maybe Impressionist, and then they have maybe Cubism or Cubist, and then maybe they have Neoclassical, you know, and it's going to be sort of like that. If you know a little bit about sort of what the art movements are, then it's going to be an easy thing. Even if like you're stuck with the neoclassical, like this could be kind of neoclassical, you look at the date on the painting and you go, okay, yeah, neoclassical was like Napoleonic, and no, we're way out of time here. Let's see, rise and fall of the Dutch East India Company. So the Dutch East India Company rose because there was really a lot of money out there, and people wanted to try and get rich off of trade. They promoted, through the banking industry, they promoted the idea of joint stock ownership, where people could buy parts of voyages and sort of like lower their risk. Like they didn't own the whole ship, and if the whole ship went down, they didn't lose everything. They lost part of the ship, which is their part. It's kind of like stocks in a company today. If the company goes bankrupt, you don't lose billions of dollars, but you might lose, you know, you have 20 stocks and they're worth $100 each. So you lose $2,000, you know, and that's not good, but it's not like losing the whole thing. However, the Dutch East India Company kind of comes up with the stock trade. They then go out to try and they're commissioned, and basically they have their own army, they have their own navy, they have their own everything. And they go out and they basically take over everything the Portuguese had throughout the Spice Islands. They take over the entire Portuguese spice trade. And they then become very, very rich trading off of that spice trade. The Dutch West India Company, much less important, Kate, because it's much smaller, and it's dealing in those sort of Caribbean islands, dealing in things like sugar and all of that. Let's see, Lazy Bird Productions in West Philly, born and raised on the playground where I spent most of my days chilling. Let's see. Okay. I'm just going to go ahead and skip that. Let's see, we got any other questions here? The 7 Years' War. Zoev, I'm not going to go over the 7 Years' War because that's in period 2. So again, if you're in the 7 Years' War, just like the Enlightenment, you're ahead of the game here. So you're moving right along. But we'll get to that. And it looks like things are starting to fall apart here on the old discussion board, which is actually timing up pretty well with the time that my daughters have to go to bed. So I need to, get in there and talk to them a little bit and get them ready for bed. So I'll answer just a couple of questions here. Let's see. What was the impact of the Columbian Exchange? All right, Emma, so the impact of the Columbian Exchange really is, well, there's lots of impacts. The Columbian Exchange is this exchange of goods between the New World and the Old World. The New World gives the Old World lots of really, really important products. They give them staple foods, which are going to become hugely important, like they give them corn, which is, massively important in terms of keeping people alive and feeding people as a basis of their diet, but also the potato, which is great because it doesn't require a whole lot of land to grow a lot of potatoes, and the Irish can tell you all about that. They also send over lots of other foods and animals and things like that. The tomato becomes huge. Can you imagine European food, Italian food without tomatoes. So they sent over chocolate, they sent over coffee. Like these are all sort of the new world going to the old world. The old world sends over things like wheat and rice, and they send over lots and lots of animals: horses, oxen, pigs, chickens, all those sorts of things, which again become, I mean, they change the diets and the lives of the people who live in the new world. But they also bring with them lots of disease, and the diseases are on the whole, there are many more diseases coming over, which with much more consequences from the old world to the new world, especially things like smallpox. I mean, devastating. The new world, I mean, the new world sends syphilis over to the old world, which has its, you know, there's some bad things about syphilis, and it does get spread for a while. It still gets spread, I guess. But it doesn't kill 90% of the population like many estimates have that old world diseases have on the new world. So those are sort of the impacts of the Columbian Exchange, but it changes both sides forever, because there's a vast new set of commodities. And one of the biggest and most important, sugar, because sugar is taken from the old world to the new world. Yes, old world to new world, and it's created and it's put down on sugar plantations, and those sugar plantations are going to be sort of the impetus for the beginnings of the African slave trade, because they really need a lot of labor on those plantations. So Sarah, let's see, before my voice runs out completely, there's between civic humanism and secular humanism, and all the humanism with different words before it. Are there different aspects of humanism? Yes. There are different aspects of humanism. I actually have a good series of videos on humanism. Now, I gotta warn you, I'm really new at this video thing. Okay? I've only been doing this a year and a half. So please excuse some of the early stuff. And even if my more recent stuff doesn't look great, please excuse it. I'm a guy with a phone, right? But let's see. So humanism is this revival of learning based on classical models, a revival of Greek and Latin ideas, or Greek and Roman ideas, the revival of the learning of Greek and Latin language, and the studying of the ideas of ancient thinkers. Civic humanism is taking those ideas and using them in order to improve your society. And so the idea is educated people are the best rulers of a society. And specifically in Italy, these city-states. And so you would take the learning that you gain from ancient models, and you would use it to make your city-state better, stronger, more beautiful, you know, all of those sorts of things. And secular humanism is simply an outgrowth of humanist thought, that if you're reading, I mean, Greek and Roman writers were by definition non-Christian, because they all, at least the ones that were new and they were reading, all predated the birth of Christ. So like they couldn't be Christian. So as they look at ideas which predated Christianity, and especially as they looked at ideas which predated Catholic Christianity, then it's sort of ideas and philosophies that don't have Christ, salvation, and all of that in them. And so there develops a secular side of this, where it's okay to not have a life which is driven towards getting yourself into heaven. There's a life, you know, there's a life here on earth, and living that in a secular way. Like a great example is Baldassare Castiglione's Book of the Courtier. You know, here let's lay out for a noble person, you know, exactly how they should behave, what's accepted, what's not accepted. We'll give you sort of a handbook for how to fit in. And none of it has to do with biblical anything. It's about, you know, hey, you need to learn how to play an instrument so that you can show off, and you need to be familiar with writers, and you need to be able to argue, and you need to be able to do these things, none of which have to do with being biblical. So yeah, if you look back on those things, so just For those of you who did not see before, let me just screen share here real quickly, because it looks like we also have some new people here who haven't been on with me before. So let me just bring this up. This is my website right here. And if you go to European history, obviously here are the thinking skills, which you've probably heard many things about. Here are the historical themes, which sort of run throughout the course. Here's the entire concept outline. And as I showed people before, you can look at period 1 and see exactly what it is that the College Board wants you to know about things. These bulleted items being sort of examples of the bigger ideas here. And then if you go to any one of these different pages here, you can look, and they're all a work in progress, so please bear with me. But you know, I'll go to the one about the Renaissance here. But if you go to the one about the Renaissance, like you've got kind of the big picture. Here's videos that are mine about, and here they come. All right, so about Renaissance humanism, secular humanism, civic humanism, Renaissance art, Michelangelo, naturalism with Jan van Eyck, all that kind of stuff. I also have study guides, which sort of are based on the concept outline. And then I have linked in, these are the homework assignments that I give to my students, but I have videos linked, not all mine, but some that are interesting, some that are funny. And for every page, I also have a playlist that I've created. Some are more extensive than others, but I have sort of all of this stuff here, so that if you learn better by video, you've got some different options, and you can see them. And there's also, you know, interesting articles spread throughout there, which sort of go deeper into some things. So I've tried to give you kind of like a one-stop shop for, you know, a lot of the things that you might need to know about all of this. So anyway, I guess that's kind of where I'm going to end things here. So the one last thing I would say is that please, if you haven't yet, subscribe to my channel, and tell other people about it. Spread the word. Send it out on social media. Say, hey, you know, every Tuesday night, this guy goes online and he helps us out with this. You know, spread the word so that other people can benefit from this learning as well. And be sure to check out the videos that I've posted. And you know, hopefully they'll be able to help you out with different concepts and all of that. And as always, you know, I welcome any feedback you have. So if you find them helpful, let me know. If you think that they're horrible, let me know. I'm gonna sit in the corner and cry a little bit, but let me know, because, you know, I'm constantly working to get better. But yeah, so I'm just sort of doing this as like my little piece to help out all of you. So if it helps, let me know. Spread the word. Tell your teachers, tell your friends, tell everyone on social media that this is where you should be. And yeah, I'm appreciating all of the thanks that are being thrown out over there. Have yourselves a wonderful night. I'll be back next Tuesday, and next Tuesday we'll be taking a look at the scientific revolution. Now, again, I'm going chronologically in my class, so you may have already done the scientific revolution, but hey, it never hurts to review. And if you don't make it next week, all of these videos are going to be archived. All you have to do is click on the archive link on my website, and you'll go to a playlist that has all of my live hangouts or review sessions, and you can view as many of them as you want to and spend as much time watching me, which really doesn't sound all that exciting, as you can. So anyway, have yourselves a wonderful Tuesday night. Thanks so much for watching. Go check out those AP Euro bit by bit videos, because I think they'll really help you. And yeah, I'll see you next week. Have a great night.